For additions, even with the autoscaler, I can still cap the theoretical maximum correct. And that is correct. You can set the max value of where the autoscaler will hit, which should theoretically cap your costs. But one thing you got to think about is that if it's hit the max and it stays there for a long period of time, it may even be better to consider a commit or to look at that for your baseline if it's going to stay there practically the entire time, just so you get the benefits of that. Well, continue on here is our cost is pretty stable with the months. So I calculate the slots based on existing costs. We never pass the limit. My understanding is I would benefit during the times of no scaling. Is this correct? That is correct. So if, say, you've got a baseline, which is your minimum or what it's going to stay at when you're not scaling, you set that to 0, and your maximum is, say, 500 slots. And say 10 hours a day, you've got queries running that will use those 500 slots. It will bill you for those 10 hours at 500 slots. But then when you're not using it anymore, it'll drop down to 0 and your billing is 0. Or if you're in between, it bills you for however many slots are allocated to the autoscaler during that time. So yeah, it does cap your costs, because you obviously don't want if you only use 500 slots, you don't want to set a maximum of like 10,000 slots, because you may have some runaway process that's going to hit that up there, cost you a lot more money than you should be using. So always keep it to what you know you want to use is the best. Keep your baseline. If you know that you're in long periods of time of 0 costs or 0 usage, set it to 0. Don't pay for 100, because your baseline, when you set a value, you're billed for that all the time. So that's when you don't have use and usage, keep it at 0, and then keep your max to what you know is going to be kind of your theoretical maximum you want to spend or what your workloads will use. Is the autoscaler does have a scale down time of 1 minute, which if you notice in the documentation, they say that there's a 1 minute minimum for query billing. That is because of the autoscaler scaling down. And if you have a query that takes 7 or 8 seconds, it'll bill you for 1 minute and 7 or 8 seconds, just because there was a minute downtime, no downscaling time that it bills you for the amount of slots you're allocated. So keep that in mind. That's also why spiky workloads are not a good fit. So if you have a spike for 10,000 queries you run every month that run for 20 seconds, you're adding another minute of usage on every one of those, which will increase your costs significantly.
And so I just want to add one more thing on top of that is, like, if you have an SLA to your queries, like if you have a dashboard feeding these queries or some analyst or the algorithm that is feeding into these queries, I would not yet go with the autoscaler immediately. The reason being that the autoscaling is not tested yet, right? So I've seen with some customers that the autoscaling slots were not available. That it took a bit much more time for them to get those slots, and the query actually ran a bit slower. So maybe I would start with baseline slots for the time being, because then it guarantees that the slots will be available to you. And otherwise, I would go with a combination of baseline or autoscaling, or just go with on demand. So I would say, like, for the queries where you have an SLAs, just be cautious that autoscaling doesn't, like, you might not get the required slots in time, and this could affect your end users.